So continuing on in our discussion of miserliness, in this chapter, inshallah, Imam Ghazali, he's going to actually talk about how is it that we cure miserliness? How is it that we cure this stinginess? And we had touched on it. We had talked about it before. He just goes into a little bit more detail here concerning certain ideas, and inshallah, we can open up the floor for a discussion on how to approach some of these concepts. So he says here that stinginess, the first thing is that it is related to this idea of love. Love of what? Hmm? Stuff? Yes, absolutely. No, that he actually mentioned that one of them is stuff. What is the second one? If I'm stingy, what is it that I love? I love stuff. What else can I love? I can love money itself, right? So these are the two things. So basically, he mentions I can love things, right? I can love stuff, or in though basically it's either going to require wealth, and sometimes those things can be the item itself, or it can be for children, meaning that this is wealth I want to pass on. The second he mentions, and he says like, and this is related to hope, right? The hope that I have in that item, and that what it will provide for me. And many times we do this, right? So, the moment we buy a car, what happens? We want a nicer one, right? It's like so, like you get a car and you're driving it. It might be like a brand new car, and it's like, oh man, this doesn't have XYZ feature, right? Or man, it's not. I don't remember it being this rough during the test drive. I'm sorry. Oh, it needs, you know what I mean? It's like, man, if only this. It's nice if only had autopilot, right? Or if it had like if FSD, you know what I mean? Like it needs that full self drive. So that definitely is there. Also, like sometimes in we fool ourselves into thinking that okay, this is something that I'm preparing and I'm passing on for my kids, and we'll talk about how to deal with both of these, inshallah. The second is love of wealth itself, right? So this idea of loving wealth in and of itself. Why is that? It's because what happens is like when this individual loves this wealth, what happens? He refuses to what? He refuses to spend it even on himself or for himself, right? This what is the difference between this two, right? So you might have people who are stingy, but you see them spending money, but you also have people who are stingy who don't. And some of this has to do with hopelessness, right? So you have this idea of, all right, if what is he hopeless in? He's hopeless in the wealth itself, meaning that if he feels that if he spends the money, what's going to happen? Hmm? Right, it won't come back, right? So you see the difference in the mindsets that he presents here and that he talks about here, and it's actually really interesting. And the way that he proposes that we deal with it is actually a really interesting conversation as well. So he says that this wealth, right, this concept or this idea of wealth that we have, wealth in it is actually a means. Wealth is actually a means, and this is something that we had established and something that we had discussed before. For us as Muslims, wealth is a means to what? Huh? To spirituality. What else? Right, a means to survival. Ahsant, right? So that's a mindset that Imam Ghazali actually discusses and talks about, and we had discussed previously. What else? Right, it's a means to giving and like basically drawing near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? If we're using it in the right way, in the right sense. And that's where it needs to be. We need to understand that essentially wealth is a tool. And this is where it needs to be. And he says here that, all right, if you look at wealth, because during Imam Ghazali's time, what would I put the equivalent here? Instead of a stone, I would write what today? Boba? Oh, Cold Stone? Do you want dessert? What's going on? All right, what gold and silver was during his time. Today, what do we use? Bitcoin. You're advanced, man. Like there's not everybody's there. Paper, right? So what do we use for wealth today? When we talk what do we identify and what do we associate with wealth? We associate the dollar, right? We associate that paper wealth. And that paper is what, and he's saying here, if you actually think about, so for him, he's like, okay, well, if you actually put gold and silver in perspective, essentially they're what? They're stones. And he's saying the same thing with us. He said, okay, well, you talk about wealth, you talk about all these things. For us, we'll have the same response. Essentially, it's what? It's just paper. So why is it that you're giving it so much value? It's just a stone or it's just paper. Like, why does it matter? Or it's just algorithms, So, do these things, why do they have so much value in our hearts? And I think this even touches on a broader concept of, all right, what is value? Right? What is value? Why is it that things have this particular cost? Essentially, like, so this chair is like, let's say $25, right, for a chair. What does that mean? Right. So in this idea of like a market, this idea of like, fiscal theory, what is money? How do we engage with it? Like, what is our interaction with it? Because for us as humans, like we need numbers to help us measure things, right? How tall is this chair? What measurement am I going to use? I'm going to use length, right? I'm going to use like feet, inches, millimeters, whatever the case might be. How heavy is this chair? All right, weight, right? I'm going to use weight. What color is this chair? Right? I might even have, there's like number scales where I can actually assign a value to that. Like, how much is this chair worth? Right? I have to put a dollar value behind it. I can't be, well, this chair is worth 4 books, right? Like we don't have like a bartering system, well, I mean, we do with some things, right? But in general, we don't have like a bartering system. We need that value in order to understand how to do exchanges. So, but at the end of the day, if we actually look at it, right, and it's actually it's actually interesting when you sit down and think about it. What gives that paper value? I do, right? Like, we as people, like, we all agree that this is $1. Like, we just agree on that. And if everybody stops agreeing, what's going to happen? Right? It just collapses. Right? No, seriously, like the dollar collapses. If one day we just like, hey, you know what? This doesn't mean anything. The chances of that happening, you know what I mean? It's getting there. Allahu Akbar. There. Right. BRICS is gonna take over. Petrodollar is gonna collapse. It's already collapsing. DXY is going down. Allah Akbar. So what is the cure? Right. So you're saying like, okay, well, we have this problem, we have this issue. How do we engage? We've identified some of the reasons of why we feel this way toward this wealth, or toward the things that get us that wealth. And he's saying that essentially this is desires. And this idea of desires, it can be the opposite of it is what? How do I deal with it? Being content. If it's a desire issue, then I need to learn to be content. And if I'm content, automatically I'm not going to what? I'm not going to desire more. Right? I'm not going to want more. The other issue, he's saying the other way to deal with this is patience. How's that a solution? How's sabr a solution to this? How's sabr a solution to dealing with desires? Okay. Reset my gauge in terms of what? So he's saying that one way is being content with what I have. Okay, I think that's pretty clear, and that makes sense. Being patient, what does that have to do with my desires, and how does that help me reset that gauge of desires? Delayed gratification, ahsant. Right, that's exactly what it is. That if I can learn not to be with this now, then I can learn not to be with it when? Later too. Right? This is the entire idea behind delayed gratification. Or there I mean, for us, there's a spiritual later, right? So the thing is like, okay, well, if I can't have a Porsche now, well, guess what? I can have it, inshallah, in paradise. So this concept, this idea of, these two concepts are extremely fundamental. They're extremely important. Right, learning how to have qana'ah, learning how to be content, and this idea of sabr and having delayed gratification. Right, these are things, if I can put them off, it allows me to put a lot of my actions into perspective. I'm sorry? How to connect it to? Oh, miserliness? Oh, because it has to do, because we said that what pushes me to be miserly? It's going to be a desire of one of two things. Either a desire for the thing, or a desire of the wealth itself. So he's saying, okay, let's take care of it at the root. Right? So he's not necessarily talking about the wealth or the things themselves. He's saying, okay, let's take care of this at the root, and let's actually engage with the desire itself, and how do I gain control over that? Can we close that door, please? Jazakallah khair. So he said these are the two things that actually allow me to combat my desires. He's saying what else? This idea of hope, right? So we had talked about having hope in our children and having hope in like the items that we seek after and that we run after. How do we deal with that? He said, well, remembering death. Right? He said this is a great way, and this is a great reminder of kind of putting that thing in perspective that I will die. Also, he's saying, look at the examples around us. What happened to there are two examples, right? There are people who are around us who either died themselves, or these individuals that might have reached a place where like we look at them and we're like, oh wow, these people are really miserly. Is that how I want to be? Right? Is that example what's good for me? Is that what I'm really striving for? So he's saying that these are two ways and these are two methods to kind of deal with that hope. He said this idea of having hope in children. So how do we deal with that? What are some proposed antidotes of me not fooling myself into thinking, oh, this is for my children, and I just like constantly save? Well, one thing he mentions is that the risk is written, right? Is there risk in my hands? No. That's something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for them. It's not something that is in my hands. I cannot guarantee that risk. Does it mean I shouldn't prepare? No, right? That's a separate conversation. Here, this is within the realm of battling what? Stinginess. This isn't about preparation. This is about battling stinginess. So remember that is the theme, and that's the discussion. And he says also, look at examples. Look at the people who've actually saved for their children. What happens to those children in general? They're spoiled, right? They get extremely spoiled. And by them being spoiled, guess what they didn't learn? How to be content and how to practice delayed gratification. He said both of these things you can look at living examples, right? That's one way of dealing with this. You can look at living examples of people who are actually miserly, people who are actually stingy, and how that's played off and played out in their lives, and how that's not how we want to be. And he said the other way is look at recorded examples, whether it be in the Quran and the Sunnah, or whether it be throughout history. Right? That we have so many examples of these different situations, of these different types of people, and what happened to them. Why is it that I am not learning from that? Right? I need to learn from those examples. That's something that's really important, something that's really fundamental. Other cures that he mentions. So he, like I said, pondering over the stingy that are around us. So you have, again, living examples of people who do that. Well, look at them and how others dislike them. Right? Nobody says like, oh, that really cheap guy, like, man, that's my hero, right? Like, oh, I really want to be like that cheap guy, when I grow up. Like, I'm saying like it's natural, right? It's natural not to want to be like that person or not to engage with that person. We when we look at people, like we want to be generous. Like when we look at generous people, we want to be generous too. We don't want to be cheap. People avoid them, right? Somebody who's cheap or somebody who's stingy, people generally try to avoid them. They try not to engage with them. Remembering the purpose of wealth. Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us? That's important. It's like a hugely important conversation. And sometimes we forget that. And why is it that Allah blessed me with this wealth? Why is it that He gave it to me? And we had talked about this before, like be content with what is needed. Meaning that if I'm content because I have today's needs taken care of, or this week's or this month's needs taken care of. And we had said like, there's a difference between like being content and stagnating, right? Being content, what is the difference? What happens? That when I'm content, stagnation and being content. They look similar, right? To the onlooker, the one who's like looking as a third party. But what is the difference? Right? The one who's content, he's going to want to grow, right? He's going to feel motivated and he's going to try to increase and try to be better. But the one who's stagnated, he's actually going to start going down. Allah protect us from that. And if he has any extra, what is he going to do with the extra? So here Imam Ghazali is setting a very clear image. He's saying, okay, like if you have enough for the month, what do you do with that? It's like, okay, well, I'm going to use this for that month. And now I have all this extra wealth. May Allah increase us. Ameen. Right? So I have all this extra wealth. What do I do with it? Huh? You give it to the Imam. Allahu Akbar. to go get boba. What do I do with extra wealth? I'm sorry? I use it for good, right? What does good look like? But that's my discretion. Like good is going to look and it's going to manifest in different ways. You know, yes. So you can't get no. So gambling is not permissible. Period. Right? It doesn't matter what the situation is. I'm not allowed to gamble. But the question then comes is like, all right, well, what are ways for me to do good with this? Can I invest that money? Is investing good? It's like حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم واللحم الخنزير. I think and there's another one about maysar. So maysar is what gambling is. So over here, when we talk about how to actually utilize money, that utilizing that money is up to me, right? That's my discretion. Can I invest it? Is investing good? Absolutely, right? Investing is great. Why? Because I get more money. Okay, well, getting money to do more with it, sure. That's one intention. What else? I'm sorry? Right, I'm stimulating the economy, right? I'm helping other businesses. Like when I invest in a particular business, what can that business do now that it wasn't able to do before? I'm sorry? You can hire more people. Provide more product, right? There's so much that can be done. And sometimes it's important for us to be like, okay, I need to have the right mindset. And I need to make sure that I'm doing this for the right reason. Because in a community, if I'm putting money into the community, like, yeah, sure. Like I want a return. Like I would like to get a return. But essentially, why am I doing this? Because I want to empower the community. And that's why I'm investing. And that's why I'm taking part. Like we want constantly wanting good. And that good can manifest in different ways. Even sometimes purchasing things. How many of you have ever gone to a store, whether it be online or in person, and you purchased a product just because you wanted to support the company, right? You didn't even need it. Right? Like you just like the messaging, right? You like the way that they presented something. And you're like, I want to contribute something, and how am I going to contribute? I'm going to contribute by purchasing. And I might not even need that thing. And so like a third party might be like, oh, you're wasting your money. Yes. But I'm looking at it as how? Like as I'm supporting this business, or I'm supporting the message, or I'm supporting whatever the cause might be. So again, the only difference is mindset. Making sure that we have that right mindset when we're dealing with other businesses. So if one could see this, right? If somebody actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them this basira, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses them with insight, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the Ahl basira, Amin. He's been blessed with insight, and this is important. And even if I'm given insight, does that mean like it's like a one time, like khalas, I've reached? What happens? Right, so it can go away, or it can get, like even with eyesight, right? Natural eyesight, what happens? It gets weaker. So sometimes you have to what? You gotta readjust and put some glasses on. And these things have to be revisited time and time and time again, because sometimes we might get stuck in a particular mindset, or we might get stuck in a particular understanding. And not just that, my spirituality, when I start my journey, it might be here, but after a couple of years, I might be here. Am I going to set the same standards for myself that that was here? No, right? I'm constantly working on improving. I'm constantly working on making sure that images are clear, and making sure that the things that I'm working for and the things that I'm striving for are in order to better myself. Abul Hassan al-Bushanji, he was in reclusion one day, and he called for a student and said to take his shirt and give it to so-and-so. Meaning that he was sitting, he took his shirt off and he gave it to a student. He said, hey, go give it to so-and-so. So his student said, he's like, what's the rush? Like, what's the big deal? Why don't you, wait until you're done and then you can come out and you can give it to me? He responded, I don't trust myself to change my mind. Meaning that there's an opportunity that I feel and that I see right now. What do I want to do? I want to take advantage of it, right? I'm feeling this generosity now. And how many of us have been in that situation? And sometimes it can be like, when we have like fundraisers and stuff, right? Like we feel the urge to give something, but once that urge passes, what happens? Then you're like, it's okay. They got enough money anyway, right? I'm sorry? Right, I could always give after. Well, let me see how much they get, and I'll fill the gap. Like whatever's left, I'll definitely take care of that. But over here, he's basically Abul Hassan. He says that, man, like when Allah gives me that inspiration and He gives me that opportunity, what should I do? I should take it, right? I should jump on it. Now, is it necessary that I engage in my first knee-jerk reaction? Like, I want to give that 50,000, but I might not be in a position to really give that, but what should I do? Give something, right? It doesn't matter how much it is, right? Because at the moment, again, it's capitalizing on that feeling. It's capitalizing on that inspiration, not necessarily capitalizing on the amount. So how do we remove stinginess? He mentions, again, like going back to and touching on some of the previous concepts, it requires effort, right? It's not something that's going to happen naturally. Like the stinginess just isn't going to like go away. It's like, oh, as I get older, I will be less stingy. No, unfortunately, it's usually like the opposite, right? I remember, I remember my father like going around like shutting off like the lights like in the house, and like I've become that father now, right? It's like you just walk around. It's like there's nobody in this room. Why is the fan on? You know what I mean? Like, so you know, it happens like with age. Inshallah, I hope it's not. It's from not wanting to be wasteful. It's not because of stinginess. Right? That's what I put. That's what I tell myself. Huh? I'm saving the planet. Is that what it is? Yeah. I'm doing my part to stop climate change. And then exaggeration. So he's saying that not only is effort needed, he says that this effort needs to be what? Exaggerated. Why? So if I think that, or if I feel like, hey, you know what, I can do $10, what should I do? Give 100. Allahu Akbar. Wow. I mean, just 10x, right? So it's like, well, maybe not 100, but it's like, okay, well, I feel like giving 10. You know what? I should give 12. And the important thing is that, like, you know, when you start shaving at those, like when we're at the edge, you know, when we start dealing with money, that's actually when we determine and we discover, right, you know, how much can I actually do? Because the problem is, like, my feeling, that's great, you know, that I'm acting on it and that I'm working on it. But Ghazali is saying, no, even do a little bit more. Why? Why just do, like, why do a little bit more? Why exaggerate? All right, the goal is to remove stinginess for sure, but like, why? Right, that's for sure. Definitely to get me to like it, but not just that. The entire premise of this whole discussion is that my personal gauge is already what? It's already messed up, right? It's already skewed. So if I understand that my gauge is skewed, it actually means I should what? I need to overcorrect a little bit. And I can get to a point, inshallah, eventually where I enjoy giving and I enjoy partaking. And he actually talks about like a staged approach. Like how do I deal with this stinginess? And he's saying that this stinginess can become like this infatuation. Like it's like an infatuation. It's like ishq. Meaning that if I'm in love with something, then there are two ways for me to deal and remove that love from my heart. One is distance, the other is time. So regardless of what the relationship is, and sometimes, like, he uses ishq as the example. So basically, you know, and maybe some of us might have felt this at some point, like, you know, the first person that we might have proposed to, right? Like we had that infatuation with that person, and then the relationship breaks off, and then what happens? Like, it's like heartbreak, right? You know what I mean? Still hurting today, right? It still hurts, right? You know, still the pain is there. But what happens? It becomes more bearable when? With time, right? It becomes more bearable with time. Or if I move away, does that help? Yeah, that can help too. So like distance and time. And he's saying it's very similar with stinginess, right? But the equivalent to distance and time is this effort and exaggeration. That if I want to remove the stinginess from my heart, just like infatuation is removed from my heart, I need to make sure I make that effort, and I have to make that extra effort. So there are two elements that help, like, kind of speed up this process. In the case of infatuation, that's distance and time. Can one work? Yeah, you know, one can work. Is it as effective as both? No. So again, this idea of like kind of speeding up this process to help remove that from the heart. I'm sorry? This is heartbreak. My heartbreak guidance is a little bit different. So my heartbreak guidance is like, okay, hey, listen, just peel the Band-Aid off and embrace the pain. That's my personal advice to anyone like who's in that situation. It happens, you know. I think it's very natural. especially when you're first looking for, a spouse. Then there is that heart that, because there is that, definitely that attachment that happens. I think that's something that's really natural, but try not to have extended timelines, right? That usually makes it. So the opposite is actually holds true as well, right? So if I'm infatuated with someone, the more time I spend, what happens to the infatuation? Right? It grows and it gets worse. And like the closer I get to the person, what happens? It just gets worse. So this is why I try to advise her, like, have a limited timeline, like very fixed, like, okay, hey, within 2 weeks, a month, this person is definitely on the okay list, or this person's on the no list, and then make a clean break at that point. Will it hurt? Sure. Yeah, it will, but make the pain, kind of embrace the pain. It becomes part of you, and you learn now how to move forward and how to handle relationships, in a more mature way. Adversity comes through pain, right? Like, I mean, like, character building, like when we talk about actually building character comes through pain, right? And pain can manifest in different ways. Like physical pain definitely builds character for sure, but like sometimes emotional pain helps too, if we know how to channel it. And people who don't know how to channel that emotional pain, what ends up happening? They end up being broken, right? So people end up breaking, and sometimes that can manifest in like really negative ways, like in really bad ways. And some of us might know, like, those friends, like after a breakup, they're just like, what I mean, like they're just an emotional wreck, and the way that they lash out and the way that they deal with others, and sometimes even the way they deal with themselves, right? It's just like really, really unhealthy. Versus had they embraced it from the get-go and just kind of made that pain a part of them, and allowed them to become a better person, and allow them to, allow it to be a character building opportunity. So he says that it's better to throw your wealth away than holding on to it, for the one who can't what? Not spend. Remember, what is the topic? Stinginess, right? So the person who has this inability to remove stinginess, what does he do? It's better for him to what? Right, like not to deal with the wealth at all, right? Because he has yet to figure out a way to manage it, and a way to kind of channel those feelings and channel that relationship. So he says here that, what is the cure? So he says that, okay, if you're stingy, that's the first step, is recognition, always, right? And regardless of the field, and like, these are discussions that I'm sure many of you have had before. Like the first step is to recognize that, hey, I'm cheap. And if I recognize that I'm cheap, the next step he actually proposes is that, okay, well, you need to start giving. You need to start giving. You need to start being generous, even if you're doing it for the sake of showing off. Why? Isn't this called like replacing addictions? Why do you think he mentions, why does he say that, okay, well, even if you're doing it for showing off, it's okay? I'm sorry? Because it's better than stinginess, right? It's better than being stingy. And not just that, if I have a goal in mind, is it really showing off? And there are times, like, I mean, and we have a very famous saying, right, within our culture. We say, fake it till you make it. And what am I faking? I'm faking the fact that I am generous. So these are the steps that I need to take, right? Like I keep giving money, and if the only validation I receive, or I can feel, is because people praise me, guess what I should do? I should embrace that, because it's still better than me being what? Stingy. And he's saying, eventually, if I keep working at it, what happens is that I reach a level of qana'ah. I reach a point where I become content. So this stepwise approach is something that he mentions, like, okay, hey, yeah, this isn't good, right? No, nobody's saying that you should do this, but it's still better than being stingy, and because it's part of the recovery path, right? It's part of that recovery path of being stingy. Go ahead. But you're not helping anyone else. So here, let me put it this way. With stinginess, who am I helping? No one. If I'm doing it for showing off, at least what? Sure. Absolutely. If this step was the what? The end. Right? If this was the end goal, I would agree with you 100%. It's like, okay, well, you're just trading one vice for another. You haven't really done anything. But if this is part of the, remember, this is part of the recovery process, right? We're talking about how to cure this sickness and this illness and this disease. And he's saying one of the worst illnesses and disease is this stinginess. You know why? Because you become infinitely selfish, right? You just become so self-involved that you don't even think about others. You don't involve others. You don't do anything for others. He said, at least when you're showing off, what happens, right? You're forced now to deal with others. You're forced now to interact with others. Like I'm forced to come out of my cocoon. And we had said, like, the essence of taqwa, the essence of husnul khuluq is dealings. And if I'm just constantly reserving myself and I'm constantly pulling myself away from situations and from people, then I'm not benefiting anyone. Like, and I'm only making things worse for myself. So he said this is similar to how a child's like weaned off his mother, right? So there are stages when the child feeds, right? So initially there's the milk, and then there's food, you know what I mean? And then it's, you know, it's mixed with the food and the feeding, and then eventually it's just food, and then they move on to like more solids. And he's saying it's the same thing here, right? There has to be a weaning off process. It can't be from, you can't jump from being stingy to being content. He's like, there has to be a transition time. Is it possible that for some people this is extremely short? Yeah, for sure. Right? If I understand that I'm suffering and I really want to move here, but that's more of a discussion of trajectory. And that discussion of trajectory is like, do some people take longer? Sure. Do some people move very quickly? Absolutely. But they're both what? They're both progressing. And that's important. And like, incidentally, you know, and related to relationships, it's like, okay, sometimes in a relationship, there is one of the spouses will be like a bad actor, right? They'll do something wrong. And then they'll make amends for what they're doing, showing that they're willing to what? Change. But then they slip again, and then they come back, right? Which is very natural. What happens now is there is a trajectory. Yes? Now, who is it up to accept that trajectory? Huh? Well, I already did because I'm working on it, right? It's going to be the other spouse, right? So, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, right? So it's like, okay, yes, I recognize that you're changing, but it's not what? It's not fast enough. Like I needed that trajectory to be sharper. And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Like, yes, ideally we should all be forgiving, we should all be that, but we also have our own standards, we have our own expectations. So this idea of showing off, this is not something, again, that, you know, it's not the goal, right? It's just meant to be a stepping stone into something that is significantly greater. So I'm not really sure why he used this example, but I think just to show the to show how mustaqbah, like to show how ugly stinginess is. And I think that's why he uses this example. So he says here, like, maggots, they can't consume an entire corpse, like an entire corpse. They can't. And what happens is, like, even while they're consuming the corpse, they start actually consuming each other. And he says that this gets to a point where now you have like a survival of the fittest situation, and eventually you're left with 2 maggots. And he said that these 2 maggots, what happens is that one ends up consuming the other, and now you're left with 1 maggot. And he says even when this one is left alone, it has nothing to what? Has nothing to feed on. And he's saying this is how we deal. This is how the analogy of how to deal with some of these vices is that you replace this one vice with another, and eventually those vices have nothing left to feed off of. But you're going from from worse to better. And he said in that pathway is like, is there some difficulty? Absolutely, right? It's not easy, it's challenging. But those vices will eventually self-consume, and they'll kind of destroy themselves. So now that an individual reaches a point where they are content. And we have to make sure, what is our job during that time? Is to make sure that we're not feeding those evil traits, that we're not feeding those vices. We're constantly, our goal is Jannah, right? Our goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our goal is betterment. Our goal is spirituality. And if that is our goal, and that is what we're working toward and working for, then all of these things cannot be fed. And the less we feed those vices, the quicker they will die off. So he's saying that in order to fight stinginess, you need knowledge. And you need, what else? Just knowledge is enough to fight off stinginess? Oh, you need action, right? These are the two things that are fundamental. And he specifies very quickly, like very clearly, on what type of knowledge is needed. He says that you need to understand the harms of stinginess. And what else do I need to understand? What is the opposite of that? If I understand the harms of stinginess, what is the opposite of that? The benefits of generosity, ahsant, right? So if I understand these two things, this is the knowledge portion of that. This is the knowledge portion of understanding how to battle that. And what efforts do I need to make? By striving. I need to keep doing that mujahadah. I need to keep striving. I need to keep bettering myself. I need to keep making that effort. And why am I going to make that effort? Because I know. I know how harmful being stingy is, and I know how beneficial being generous is. And he says that some people, though, they're just blinded, right? They can't see any of those things. So these individuals that are blinded, what happens? They can't take any action because they don't see what? They don't see the problem, right? They don't see their own stinginess. They don't see the issue. And because of that, they're not going to take any action. And if they don't take any action, they're not going to take any medicine. And if they're not taking any medicine, they don't, not only do they not know what medicine to take, but they don't even know how to use it. So just because somebody has a headache, they might know that Tylenol is what I need to take, but they won't know what, how often or how many. And he says this is equivalent to what? He said this is equivalent to death. Meaning what? This is a spiritual death, ahsant. This is just a spiritual death. What is the best that can be hoped for this person? So what did some of the Sufi sheikhs do? They would remove appointment of some of their murids from their zawiyah. So a murid is equivalent to a sheikh and a student, right? So the sheikh is the Sufi sheikh and the murid is the student. And the zawiyah was the place where they would do their ibadah, they would do their worship. And the person would head certain types of worship, whether it be reading Quran or whether it be adhkar or whatever the case might be. And what he would do is he would actually remove him from that position. Why? Huh? Dang, bro, it became revolutionary all of a sudden, man. I'm sorry? To listen to their ego. Why? Because if the sheikh appoints him, be like, okay, hey, you're gonna head the dhikr circle here. What happens? How does he feel? Right? He feels happy, like he got appointed and he has a position now. And he's saying, not only does he do that, he makes him choose someone else to take over. Why? And again, this idea of subduing the ego. He'll remove his provisions, whether that he'll lessen his clothing, he won't give him as much to wear. He'll remove the prayer mat that he chooses, right? That he enjoys. And again, this idea of removing that attachment from the dunya. And he says, he tells them, he says, okay, hey, listen, all these clothes, yeah, you need to give them away. What is your favorite prayer mat? He's like, well, this one. He's like, yeah, I'll go give it to so-and-so. I'm sorry? Right? These are all lessons for us to learn from. Because the thing is, he's basically saying, if a person has 1,000 possessions, guess what? He has 1,000 things that he loves. And the problem with when we have all these things that we love is that the more things I have, it is actually a way for me to gauge my love of this world and to gauge my love of this dunya. And every time I lose those individually, what happens? Like, it hurts, right? And I have that pain. That pain is an indication of what? Attachment. It's very telling. And essentially why? Because we surround ourselves with things because we fear poverty and destruction. That's why we surround ourselves with these things. Like, we build these castles around us because we don't want to appear or we don't want to be poor. So over here you have a story of one of the kings. So basically he was brought a plate, right? He was brought this plate. It was like adorned with like turquoise and like other rare jewels, and it was brought to his court, and he was like really happy about this. So he said to his advisors, "Well, what do you think? Hey, what do you guys think about this?" And one of the advisors, they said, "We see it to be a travesty or poverty. It's either one of the two." And he's like, "How so? Like, what? Why is that?" So his advisor responded. He says, "If it breaks, it will be a travesty, irreparable, and if it's stolen, you will continue seeking similar to it and be unable to find it. And the one who's constantly seeking something, we know that person, we call him somebody who's in poverty or somebody who is poor." So this is what he meant. Before this item reached you, you were safe from both of these things. Before this thing ever came, you didn't have to worry about that. And they agreed to destroy it one day, and the king was appalled. So they were like, "Hey, we're going to destroy this thing." And the king was like, he's like, "My advisor is correct. If only it never came to me." Like he had that realization, because once they said it, what happened? Right, that's all he could think about. Like, he immediately realized the attachment his heart had to this particular item. So all of the items of the dunya are similar, in that these attachments that can be created, and that can be with an enemy of Allah. And how is that? Because it pulls them closer to the hellfire. This dunya is an enemy to Allah's walis, because it gives them grief over the things that they cannot have. It's also an enemy to Allah Azza wa Jal, because it prevents the slaves from reaching Him Azza wa Jal. And it's enemy of itself in that it consumes itself. And how is that? And what does that mean? Basically, wealth can't protect itself. So in order to protect wealth, what do I need? Right, it needs protection. So nowadays, what do I do with my wealth? How do I protect it? I put it in a bank. Right, and if I have wealth, right, if I have gold bars or other things, and if I don't put it in a bank, I would put it somewhere safe, right? I would keep a safe in the house, and a safe costs money, right? It's kind of ironic. Like all the things that we do, like we have wealth, and then to have that wealth, I need to protect that wealth, and in order to protect it, I need to use more more wealth. And he said, and this is what he means by it consumes itself. That when you have so much, you need to spend that much more to protect it. And he says, and if any one of us understands the shortcomings of that wealth, we would never be pleased with it. Like if we understand wealth has all these shortcomings, then we would never truly be pleased with that wealth, because we understand what the true value of it is. That we would only take what we need, and we would be content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And if we understand that, essentially we won't be stingy. And that is the goal, right? We're working not to be stingy. We're working to, whatever extra that we have, we use it for good. And we use it as a means to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said that the way that he deals with this wealth is similar to the shore of the Tigris River. Meaning that when I look at wealth, to me it appears as if it is unlimited. And if I know something is unlimited, would I be stingy with it? No? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so for those of us who have gone to the beach before, you know what I mean? Do I steal like a cup of ocean water and be like, haha, now nobody will get this ocean water, right? Or sand, right? You know, there's so many things that if we understand how much of this there is, the less value that item has in our eyes. So that's something that's important. The next chapter is the different uses a servant can put their wealth to. No, I think we have time. So wealth, like we said, is described in both. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses wealth and it means to describe as something that is good, and He uses to describe that something is bad. Meaning that wealth in and of itself is very benign, right? It doesn't have any irada, it doesn't have any will of its own. And when it's used for good, it is good, and when it's used for bad, it is bad. So how do we protect against its venom? So he said there are 5 ways. He said the first way, knowing the purpose. Why is it that an individual has wealth? Paying attention to how we acquire that wealth and making sure that those means are halal. Also, paying attention to how much we acquire. Right? That's something that's important. And part of this, there are 2 aspects to this, right? There's personal spiritual accountability, making sure that I know how much money is coming in so that I'm spending it and using it in the right way. There's also a fiscal responsibility that's part of this, right? If I don't know how much money is coming in, am I going to budget appropriately? No, I'm just going to keep spending because I have no idea how much money is coming in. No, I don't know how much money is going out. Paying attention to how it's spent. Again, very important. Where is this money going? And lastly, correcting his intention, what he gives and what he takes. So these individually, knowing the purpose, why did Allah create it? Right? Allah is the one that created wealth. There has to be a purpose behind it. Why do we need it? These are two very valid questions. Because if we understand the purpose, we know how much importance it actually deserves. Paying how much, like how it's required. So he says that, hey, if you ever have politicians or statesmen giving you wealth, you can't take it. Why? Well, that's definitely a big part of it. Why else? Right? Because by them giving you money, they're setting expectations, right? Why is the statesman or why is the politician giving you money in the first place? Is it because they're so sincere and they're generous? Like we know how many generous politicians, mashallah, do we know in the world today? Donald Trump, Allahu Akbar. Important, right? Because there's always an ulterior motive, right? There's always an ulterior motive that's attached to that wealth, which is why it should not be accepted. Because they're basically buying you, right? Either they're buying your vote, they're buying your support, they're buying a product, whatever the case might be, there's something that they are looking for. You should avoid disliked wealth, right? So he's saying that there's certain types of wealth, and sometimes we don't take it to mean this, right? So someone might give us money, like for example, if I'm teaching a class and there's an exam coming up and somebody takes me out to eat. Should I accept the invitation? Yes, Allahu Akbar. No, I shouldn't. Why? Right, because there's a chance that when it comes time to grade this person's paper, what am I going to do? Right, I'm going to have a bias, be like, man, that food was so good though, right? Unless it was really bad, then that's a big problem, right? Then I'll have a bias against. But either way, it's not going to work. And sometimes, it'll come across as a gift, but it's not really a gift. It's really a bribe. So in that, if people know that you're the type of person to accept those gifts, how are people going to view me? Right? They're going to view me in a negative light, saying that this person can actually be bought or he can be influenced. Paying attention to how much he acquires. So he's saying that there are three clear categories, right? Whether it be the lowest, the middle, or the highest. And he says the more he inclines toward that lowest, the better it is for him. Because if he keeps pushing here, does this ever end? Right? This can get to the point where it's nothing, correct? But once I reach that point, then I know I've gone too far. Is there an end here? No. And he's basically saying, all right, if most of us are here, right, if not all of us, it's very easy to lean which way? Toward low or high? High. It's very easy to lean toward high. So I'm saying you need to overcorrect toward low. How we spend money. So he's saying that, okay, well, you shouldn't be cheap, nor should you be a spendthrift. So if we actually look at a lot of these recommendations, like I said, there's a huge spiritual part to this. There's no doubt about it. But if you look at it, it's actually a very practical financial advice on how we should be with our wealth and our attitude toward it. Because if I understand where my wealth is coming from, if I understand how much is coming in, if I understand what I'm spending it on, it can actually give me a lot of financial independence and control over what is happening in my life and how to deal with that wealth. Correcting his intention. So again, this is something that's I think this is very easy, right? This is not difficult at all. Where Ali radiallahu anh, karamallahu wajhu, he said, if an individual took all the wealth of this world and intended Allah's pleasure, then he is a zahid, like an ascetic. And we don't associate zuhud with wealth, right? That tends not to be a strong association. We usually associate poverty with being a zahid or with being ascetic. And he says, if he left it all and did not intend Allah's pleasure, then he is not a zahid. So if an individual needs to dedicate all his movements, moments of stillness to Allah and his worship, or that which will aid his worship, right? This is the goal. The goal is that we do everything, whether it be in our moments of stillness, or whether it be when we're moving, whether it be with acting, whether it be with interacting, when we're giving, when we're taking, all of these need to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he mentions that, the things that we tend not to associate with worship, like mundane actions, like walking, eating, drinking, sleeping, like we don't associate those things with worship. But if I do those with the right intention, what happens? I'm rewarded, right? They went from being mundane to being acts of worship. And he said that this should apply to everything. Every single item that we own, we should try to do our best to make sure that our intention for that item, our intention for that action is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says that even these things, very mundane, right? But these are things that are necessary for me to function, right? Can I say, look, I'm such a zahid, I'm such an ascetic that I'm not going to use plates? How am I going to eat? Or, that I'm not going to have clothes? Like, how am I going to worship? I'm not going to have pants, right? Like, it can't be that extreme. It can't be to that extent. So there definitely is a limit that's there. And if I understand that I have my bare necessities, and if I understand that I have all of the things that I need in order to function, in order to worship, in order to be a member of society, anything that is beyond that, I need to make sure that my intent is to help others. My intent is to better others. My intent is to be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, it's like the one who takes the snake of wealth, its pearls and treasures, and have saved himself from its poison. And I like how he brings a similitude of this world, this dunya, and like likens it to a snake. Because the snake has venom. And he's saying that there are some people who are actually able to what? They know how to wrangle the snake, right? They know how to deal with the snake, and they know how to extract the venom. And there are other people who just play with the snake, and what happens to them? they get bit. May Allah protect us. And he says, so this person who's reached that state, right? This person who understands where the wealth is coming from, how to use it, like they have that balance, everything. He said that this person, it doesn't matter how much wealth comes in. Why? Because they'll remain unaffected. And had you taken all that wealth away, what would happen? The same thing, right? This person, his wealth is in his hand, it's not in his heart. And he says that, but the layman who imitates him, right? This requires knowledge. We had said that. And so when we talk about a scholar here, when we talk about knowledge here, an alim here, it means someone who knows the reasons that stinginess is harmful. We're not talking about like a scholar in the religion. So if I know the reasons that stinginess is harmful, if I know the benefits of generosity, and I understand that I need to continue striving for this, then this individual is the one who is successful. And there are other people who try to imitate him, right? So they see this guy, they see this wealthy individual who actually is an ascetic, he is a zahid, right? They see like that person is striving. All I see is like what I see as a lay Muslim, as a lay person. So what do I try to do? He says that I try to grab that snake too. I'm like, well, he can do it. Guess what? I can do it too. And he says that, what is the difference? He says, well, once he gets bitten by the snake, if a person in real life gets bitten by a snake, what happens? He feels it and he knows it. He said, what is the problem with the dunya? The moment I'm bitten by the dunya, I don't know. And may Allah protect us. He brings a piece of poetry. He said, the world is like a venomous snake, even if the tongue is more slight. Meaning that we might not feel the bite and we might not feel the sting, but it is more dangerous. And he says, like, even this entire discussion, it's kind of like describing colors to a blind man. Right? It's tough. It's not necessarily easy. It's not necessarily straightforward. There's a lot of gray areas in this, right? How do I describe my relationship with wealth? Like how do I put that in words? It's tough, right? It's not so easy. And he's saying that I've tried to do the best that I can in trying to kind of simplify the subject and kind of make sure that at least an individual has some of the tools to help gauge how to distance that relationship from him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Any questions or anything? Yes. Slavery's over, bro. So no, I'm saying like there's a difference. Like it depends on what it is that you're trying to break, right? Does it make sense for me to break my attachment to my friends? And what do we mean by attachment? I'm sorry? Right. That's the thing, right? If the type of relationship I have with those people is a relationship of validation, then I need to re-examine and say, like, are these people really my friends? Right? And it's not a problem with the friends. It's a problem where? But where's the problem? The problem is with me. So, like, like in such relationships, like friendships are voluntary, right? Does anybody come and like force you, like, be like, you need to be friends with them, right? Like we're not like, maybe when we were like children, like our parents would force us to be friends with others, but once you're an adult, what is forcing those relationships? And the thing is, sometimes we like, oh well, we can't choose our mothers or siblings, and blah blah blah. Well, I can choose the extent of the relationship. Are there some of us who have a better relationship with a friend than we do our sister? Right? Like it happens. It's not wrong, right? There's no right or wrong there. The only time it becomes a problem is if I cut that relationship, right? If I break that relationship. But it's not uncommon. But so, like I said, like the extent of the relationships, the nature of those relationships, like the only thing I can't do, like with my parents in terms of relationship, I can't be like, well, you're not really my father, right? like that you can't do it. But with friends is different, right? You can be like, well, you're not my friend, and that's it. Like, the relationship's over at that point. Yes. Yes. He says always err in terms of how to spend money. Sure. Yeah. 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 Wallahu alam, ya akhi. I don't know. I don't I don't, because the way he kind of presents the concept and the idea, it's always going to be err toward the side of less for yourself. And stinginess isn't less for myself, it's more wealth, right? Or more items. So he doesn't, I don't think he even frames the discussion in that way, because neither of those is meant to be sought after. The ideas and the things that are meant to be sought after are that I'm distancing myself from stinginess. Um, but both are bad. تفضل أذن.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Yeah. Yeah. Allah musta'an. Khair. Any other questions? Are we and there? طيب. والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خير.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قامت الصلاة قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا تراصوا يرحمكم الله، يعتدلوا. الله